Hey guys, it's TheMetalBlade5, and welcome to my response to Realmwarsii. I don't care how I pronounce his name. Metal Blade doesn't look like a Pokemon commentary, which doesn't make any sense since I'm not a Pokemon, so of course I'm not going to look like one. This wasn't the thing that I was planning on responding to next, but this dude decided to blatantly promote this damn video on my channel by posting a comment, which fortunately was classed as spam, and upon seeing it, I can't get it out of my head since it pisses me off on so many levels that I had to do it immediately. Now this commentary is a response to my top 10 most hated Pokemon list, so it's time for me to fight fire with fire. But before I start, I want to get one thing straight. I'm not hating on this video because it criticizes one of my own videos. I actually can take criticism, believe it or not. The reason why I'm responding to it is because everything about this video to me is wrong. His points are honestly stupid. He doesn't actually listen to some of my points, but argues against them anyway. He actually edits some parts of the video to take my points out of context. And most of all, rather than providing constructive criticism, he instead uses the opportunity to straight up attack me and encourages viewers to harass me. He even calls me a fucking idiot at one point. Since this video was uploaded, I have had people swarm my video with his stupid arguments and being like, "Oh, you're wrong, and I will not stand for this." Now, I would normally say I have nothing against him, but this video was my first introduction to him, and it did not give me a first impression when he's obviously blatantly attacking me and being so immature. Anyway, let's get to it. So first up, before he even gets to the list, he talks about how in my intro I said I've covered my favorite Pokemon and my favorite legendaries, and calls me stupid for saying legendaries. That's the actual plural for legendary. When I was writing the script for my top 10 favorite legendary Pokemon, I typed legendaries and it had the red squiggly line in which I clicked and the correction was legendaries. That's the actual word. Maybe you should check that before you start saying I'm stupid. We haven't even reached the list and he's already giving incorrect information. So first we get to Delphox, and Mr. I Don't Listen criticizes the part where I say that I think that Delphox's design doesn't compliment the fact that it's a fox by saying it has a fox head. This is a case in which he takes my points out of context because part of my argument was that I felt that other fire starters like Blaziken, Infernape, and Emboar convey their animals much better. But he splits these two bits apart to make my argument look invalid. Plus, I even said later on that to me, Delphox looks like they designed a dress and just added a fox head on top. But again, he takes my point out of context. And on the subject of Blaziken, he says that Blaziken's body doesn't match it being a chicken. It has long legs, which is a feature of a chicken. Next, he goes over how I say that the only thing witch-related about Delphox is the stick it uses as a wand, by saying that its arms are supposed to look like wizard robes. First off, it's not even confirmed that that's the case, but wizards are not witches. Witches do not wear wizard robes. Then he goes over my suggestions for how Delphox could have looked more like a witch by saying that when I talk about the fur on its head possibly looking like a witch's hat, he says, its fur is already designed after a witch. And once again, witches do not wear wizard robes. Besides, the hat is the most iconic feature of a witch, so either way, it would look more like a witch as a result. As for when I say they could have turned Delphox's stick into a broomstick to fly on, he says my point is invalid, since I said before that the stick was the only witch-related feature, so it wouldn't change anything. Listen here, just so you actually hear what I say. Wands are not just associated with witches, they are also associated with wizards and magicians. Therefore, giving Delphox a broomstick would be more specifically related to witches, since after the hat, a broomstick is the most iconic witch feature. As for when I talk about how I think some fan art on the internet for Fennekin's Final Evolution looks better than Delphox, he says, well, that doesn't discredit the actual design. That's not what I was doing at all. I just said I think it looks better. He compares this to him baking a cake that isn't as good as another by saying, well, what I made was still good. Well, that depends on what you put in the cake and how you actually made it. For example, if you used your own shit in the cake, then it would taste disgusting. This is the first of many cases in which he twists my words to make it sound like I'm saying something different to what I actually say. Also, a lot of he just skips past and doesn't even acknowledge the fact that Delphox's design grew on me, and that I think it's good in battle, to take my points even more out of context. Instead, he just uses this really annoying skipping animation. Seriously, that is one of the most annoying things I have ever seen in my life. Aside from your arguments. Next is Unknown. First off, he criticizes me just for briefly mentioning that I don't find Unknown's design interesting, despite saying that it doesn't have anything to do with why I dislike it. It was only for a brief mention, and I just wanted to point it out in case anyone was curious as to what my thoughts on Unknown's design was. Basically, the entire Unknown section of this video boils down to him saying that my reasons for why I don't like Unknown are wrong because it was created specifically to introduce hidden power and for world building. That is a flimsy excuse. You don't need to introduce a completely new Pokemon to learn about one move, which almost every Pokemon can learn. And as for world building, they could have just used the Unknown text as the ancient language, rather than making the language an actual Pokemon. Even then, that doesn't excuse Unknown for sucking. I mean, Arceus is the god of Pokemon, and also exists for world building, but it has the highest base stats of any non-Mega Evolved Pokemon. And I can mention a bunch of other Pokemon for a similar case. Getting back to Hidden Power, he says that the move is good because of its decent power and type coverage. I said, and I quote, Unknown can only learn one move throughout the entire series, being Hidden Power, which is barely going to do any damage due to its shit stats. The reason why I said Hidden Power from Unknown will be weak is because of its stats, not because of the move itself. This just proves that you don't listen to me at all. Next up, he criticizes me over talking about Unknown's ability to bend reality whether not being mentioned in the Pokedex. I will give you that the Pokedex doesn't mention bending reality, but it still mentions that it has a strange power which you've never seen in the games. As for the anime, he says that I'm wrong because the anime pulls a lot of bullshit. I know the anime does a lot of stupid stuff, but it doesn't outright lie about the abilities of a Pokemon, except for Unknown, and I guess Pikachu when being able to electrocute ground types, but even then, that was only during Kanto, and Unknown is a Johto Pokemon. Next up, he criticizes me for not mentioning people who thought Unknown would be powerful based on the third movie. Well, since this is apparently such a massive problem, Tricky Wii and Tamashi Hiroka did the list of their top 10 most disappointing Pokemon. Unknown was on the list, and the reason was because they thought it would be powerful from seeing the third movie, and even some people in the comments said the same thing. Are you happy now? Then he says my point about Unknown being connected to Arceus is wrong because I said it was reinstated in fan theories. Reinstated! Do you not know what the word means? In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Unknown appear during the Arceus event, which is what spawned these theories to begin with. I wasn't going off of the theories, I was going off of the games, and the proof is literally on the fucking screen! Next he talks about me going over the side quest in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, where you had to catch every Unknown form being unrewarding by saying that I didn't go over why it was unrewarding. It's unrewarding because all you get is a rare candy, which is a good item, but you could just grind to have your Pokemon level up, and that would be much faster. The only reason why I didn't go into the specifics is because it would be going off topic. Lastly, he makes such a big deal over me not liking the official pronunciation of Unknown. He says that it's the straw that broke the camel's back. I said it was the cherry on top, and the meaning of that phrase is a little something extra added on. It was one tiny thing I didn't like. I already hated Unknown before knowing the official pronunciation, and that just added a little bit more to why I don't like it. Plus, he says that the reason why I don't like it is because I was pronouncing it wrong. Again, listen up, since you weren't paying attention. I hate the pronunciation because I think it sounds stupid, not because I was pronouncing it wrong. Getting to Alomomola, he says my point on it and Love Disc looking similar is wrong because there are animals in the real world that look similar but are different species. This is Pokemon, not the real world. Alomomola is the only case of a Pokemon looking so similar to another, but it having absolutely no connection. He uses examples such as Caterpie and Wurmple to explain similar-looking Pokemon, but they don't look similar at all. Caterpie is green with a large round head, while Wurmple is red with a slimmer head and spiny back. What were you trying to convey here? When getting to Alomomola's stats, he says my point of me taking it down in 1 or 2 hits is wrong because of the fact that its defense stats are low. I always saw HP as being like a defense stat, since it shows how much damage you need to do in order to take it out. And I think that its high HP being less notable still kind of stands, since it doesn't perform the function of the HP stat very well. You mentioned Snorlax and Chansey's special defenses, but I've even had trouble taking them on with physical moves from my own experience. Moving to Alomomola's move pool, he tells me that I should just use it for double battles. Except the vast majority of battles in Pokemon games are single battles. I know this VGC, but I'm not a competitive player, and this list was supposed to be more of a general view of each Pokemon, covering their uses in all forms of battles. And on the subject of move pool, we get to a recurring trend in this video. From this point on, up until Incineroar, he slams me for not mentioning moves that these Pokemon can learn through TM, breeding, and tutors. There's a reason why I didn't mention them, being that you have to go out of your way to teach them those moves. For TMs, you need the actual TM. For breeding, you need to hatch from an egg with the proper parent to get the right move. And for tutors, you need to find the move tutor and have the proper item to teach them the move in the first place. I thought that from my wording during these sections, such as the moves it naturally learns, and especially from saying you're going to have to rely on TMs to get this thing good type coverage when going over Beware, would have shown this, but since you were possibly half asleep when watching my video, you didn't catch that. Besides, there are other YouTubers who criticize Pokemon for having to rely on TMs for moves. For example, in Sugar Compromise Pokemon Platinum LP, there were some Pokemon he said weren't good, partially because they needed TMs to learn good moves. So why is it okay for him to do it, but not me? You could argue that I didn't make my reasoning clear enough, but the fact that you didn't even consider this possibility is what pisses me off the most. So there goes about half of the complaints that you bring up just gone. Next up, Alolan Persian. First up, he calls me a fat-shaming fuck for saying that Alolan Persian was fat. I was more referring to it being fat for no reason, rather than hating it because it was fat. Unlike most people, I actually like Emboar's design, and that's a fat Pokemon. You do also mention that Alolan Persian isn't even fat, but if you compare the in-game models of Alolan Persian and regular Persian, its body is chubbier. Then we get to me not understanding why Alolan Persian is fat, with him saying that there is a reason being Alolan Meowth's pampering. The only guess I could make for why Alolan Persian is fat is because its pampering may have involved being fed a lot, but that hasn't been proven. Besides, Alolan Meowth stayed slender despite their pampering, so why does it result in it becoming chubbier when it evolves? As for me saying that Alolan Persian's head looks too exaggerated, he compares it to a caricature, but just because that's what it's supposed to be, or at least according to you, doesn't automatically excuse it for looking bad in my opinion. Also, when I say its head should be weighing it down, he says that Emboar shouldn't be able to walk with its stubby legs. Emboar's legs aren't that short, and they're certainly wide enough to the point that they could hold up its upper body weight. Getting back to my opinions, for some ungodly reason, this guy takes such offense to me saying, "in my opinion," in the video. I know I say it a lot, but the reason why I say it is because I don't want people to think I'm saying these things as a fact. I do say it's my opinion at the beginning, but with saying things like Alolan Persian's model looks just as bad as in the data mine, which, by the way, I meant from actually seeing its animations in-game, I don't want people to think that I'm factually saying that. So that's why I add, "in my opinion." Because I actually respect other people's opinions, unlike what you kind of came across as by calling me stupid. It's just the kind of person I am. So attacking me for saying this is effectively attacking my personality. Also, you think that I'm only saying "in my opinion" to avoid criticism, which isn't the case at all. I'm all for constructive criticism, which you don't give, and I'm fully aware that you can criticize the reasoning behind someone's opinion. Hell, it's basically what I do in my other response videos. But don't just assume that I said "in my opinion" to avoid criticism. Since in this video, you kind of come across as a bit full of yourself, if I'm being honest, and I guess that makes me kind of think that whatever you think must be fact. And also because it just makes your viewers think that I'm like some sort of like wimp and can't take criticism or something, just because you made this stupid assumption. At the end of the Alolan Persian section, he criticized me for thinking that they could have made Alolan Persian a sassy panther with the personality of Giovanni's Persian by saying, "what does it have to do with design?" When talking about Giovanni's Persian, I said that's what personality they could have given it, like how Alolan Meowth is shown to be spoiled in its animations. That part wasn't about design, but you don't listen, so who gives? Then he goes on a rant about how design doesn't reflect personality, but it actually can. I mean, Alolan Meowth destroys your whole argument, since its design shows its sassy personality from its facial expression, which is what I thought they could have done with Alolan Persian. It's so funny how later on in the video you give me a lecture on character design, yet you don't even know that you can reflect a character's personality in their design. Double standards, don't you think? The only other thing he talks about is that in regards to Alolan Persian's beauty, he shows us Pokedex entries, which talk about its coat, in which he says that what it refers to. But the Pokemon website clearly states that the entire Pokemon is considered beautiful, not just the coat, and even then that was just a theory that you made up. Now for Bruxish. He starts off by taking so much offense to my joke of shiny Brooks just looking like an Italian restaurant. I thought that people would at least understand where the Italian part came from, but this is Mr. I don't listen we're talking about here. The reason why I said this is because of the color combination. It has red, white, and green in the color scheme, which are the same colors as the Italian flag. And then it also has yellow, which makes me think of the cheese on a pizza, along with the red being the tomato sauce, and the green possibly being lettuce or green peppers. That's why I thought of an Italian restaurant. I even made this comparison to my sister when she was looking for the Pokedex, and she agreed with me. Besides, it's just a stupid joke anyway, so why are you taking it so seriously? Then when I say that Bruxus gets outclassed by Golisopod, he goes back to the stupid world-building excuse. Bruxus has nothing to do with world building, and that still doesn't excuse its lackluster stats. Continuing on my point of Bruxus being outclassed, he says that my point is invalid because there's other Pokemon like Typhlosion who also get outclassed. So? That doesn't excuse Bruxus for not being as good as Golisopod. Plus, you skipped this, but I mentioned how Bruxus is almost impossible to find in the wild when playing through the game normally, as in, when you're not actively seeking it out. While Golisopod is actually easier to get due to Wimpod always appearing in its designated areas. Wimpod is hard to catch, but at least you can always find it. And while it's harder to raise, the experience share has you covered for that. Now for Hypno. First up, he criticizes me talking about Hypno's low special attack by saying that it wasn't designed for that purpose. I know Hypno is supposed to be a special wall, but fighting with it is going to be a bit of a chore just because of its average special attack. They could have lowered the physical attack and moved some of that towards increasing its special attack a bit more. You also mentioned Nasty Plot and Calm Mind, but Hypno doesn't learn Calm Mind through level up, which again means you have to go out of your way. And while both moves are beneficial, they'll be more beneficial on a stronger special attacker like Alakazam. Skipping past him complaining about TMs, once again, he argues against my point about Pokemon like Snorlax fulfilling the job of putting the opponent to sleep and dealing damage afterwards by saying that Snorlax can't learn Dream Eater, which Hypno can only learn through TM. When I said that, I meant just Snorlax using regular attacking moves like Body Slam, which does give it stab, complements Snorlax's attack stat, and it has an easier job putting the opponent to sleep in the first place and taking damage after the opponent wakes up due to its bulk. Getting to me talking about Hypno kidnapping children and saying that it spawned creepypastas, he says my point is invalid because creepypastas are fan-made. I'm not a fucking idiot. If you actually paid attention, then you would know I say that it spawned creepypastas, meaning that it caused them. You even say this yourself. I wasn't using the creepypastas as an actual point, but rather that Hypno is so creepy that it inspired people to make creepy stories about it. Or just one. I thought there was more than one Hypno creepypasta, but that isn't the case. Then he criticizes me for calling Hypno a pedophile, since not human. I wasn't being serious when I said that. It was a joke that was in regards to it kidnapping children looking like an old man. But of course, like my Italian restaurant joke, you have to take everything I say so seriously. Also, he says it was the first generation of Pokemon when I talk about how I find a lot of Gen 1 designs basic. I thought that this would be a no shit thing, but since you don't listen, I have to mention this. I know they're basic because it was the first generation, but my opinion was that they don't stand out as much compared to later Pokemon for me. I know why they're basic, but that doesn't mean I can't still compare them to later gen Pokemon. Next up is Aromatisse. He uses the Bulbapedia page on Aromatisse to complain about my point in regards to it not looking like a flamenco dancer or perfume by saying it isn't just the design. I said from looking at it! I was only speaking in regards to the design. I know things like its name comes from scent, but I was just talking about the design. This is the same case later on when he complains about me saying that Aromatisse doesn't have anything to do with plague doctors by pointing out that they use perfume. I was talking about the design. Why are all the people saying your arguments on my video taking you seriously? Then he says that I'm just whining about the design because this isn't what I wanted when I said that I found Aromatisse disappointing. The reason why I don't like Aromatisse's design is because of the design itself. My point on finding the design disappointing was just me saying what I thought the design could have been. Also, by your stupid logic here, anybody who finds something disappointing is just a whiny baby. Oh look, Mass Effect 3! We know that everybody was disappointed with this game because of the ending, but in reality, you're just wrong and are whiny children. You see how fucking stupid this logic is? What pisses me off so much is that I have to explain all of this, because you won't pay any attention! Also, he says I'm biased. Yes, I am admittedly biased because I don't like these Pokemon, so I'm naturally gonna have reasons why I dislike them that some people may disagree on. Besides, it's my opinion, which you seem to hate so much. So of course, my reasons are going to be specific to me. I'm not factually saying that they're bad. For the last part, he criticizes me for saying that Aromatisse should be more like Slurpuff. I didn't say it should be exactly like Slurpuff, like what you're insinuating, since there wouldn't be a point. But this was under the context of me thinking that Aromatisse's stats were so randomly distributed, while Slurpuff's feel more focused. Plus, I even gave an alternate option, which was just to give it higher special attack or special defense. I haven't said that Aromatisse only learns one physical move leveling up, which makes me wonder why they don't just make the physical attack stat lower and move it towards the special attack or special defense. If you can't pay attention, don't make a response. Getting a little bit closer to the end of this nightmare, we reach the elemental monkeys. First up, he complains about me talking about the pre-evolutions when saying that Pansage's mouth is always open. I will give you this just because I should have explained it a bit better. I know Pansage's mouth being open is the opposite of Speak No Evil, but it at least had something related to his mouth, while Simisage has nothing to do with his mouth. Then he criticizes my personal grudge against Simipour by saying I didn't have to evolve it, but instead use a different water type. Again, you don't listen. I had Panpour for like pretty much the entire main game at that point. I was in the after game when I evolved it. So if I did get another water type, I would either have to grind for it to catch up to the rest of my team, or if I caught an after-game Pokemon, it wouldn't have all the EVs that Panpour/Simipour got. So that's why I felt stuck with using Simipour. Plus, I don't dislike it because I was forced to have it, but because I had a Pokemon I didn't like on my team. Also, he says that my grudge is biased. Again, it's my opinion as to why I don't like Simipour. If I was saying that Simipour was factually bad because of my personal grudge, then that would be unfair. But again, it's my opinion. You are grasping at straws here. Then we get to the elemental monkey stats, and this is proof that this guy pays absolutely no attention to what I say. He calls me a hypocrite at this part because I said that Bruxus's stats were decent, but I call the monkey stats mediocre when they're higher. Jesus fucking Christ. If you actually listen to me, then you would know that I said that Bruxus's speed was decent. As for Bruxus's stats, it has good physical attack and decent speed, not its overall stats. Meanwhile, when I said that the elemental monkey stats were mediocre, I was referring to their overall stats. All the elemental monkey stats are mediocre. What does that say about your credibility? Overall, Bruxus's stat total is lackluster for me. Lastly, he goes back to saying I'm biased when I talk about Simisear being dead last in the Volcanion the Mechanical Marvel distribution vote by saying that I was shocked that Pawniard got second to last, and he says that I'm only shocked because I like Pawniard. I do like Pawniard, but the reasoning behind that bit of text was because I don't know anybody who dislikes Pawniard. While with the elemental monkeys, they are mostly hated for what I've seen on the internet, so I found it weird that Pawniard scored so low. The only thing I can think of is that people just focus on Bisharp more. As for where the other elemental monkeys are, honestly, I don't know, since this image is actually from Rabid Luigi and Hoodlum Scrafty's top 10 worst Pokemon designs video, which didn't mention the other two and I couldn't find where they were. But my reasoning was just that at least one of the three are strongly disliked. So what does that say about the other two? Also, on the subject of Rabid Luigi and Hoodlum Scrafty's video, both Alomomola and the elemental monkeys were on the list for the same reasons as my video, but that's apparently fine for them, but wrong for me. Sure, go after the guy with less subscribers. Now for Beware. First, when I say that I think Beware looks like a knockoff, after saying it doesn't look like a Pokemon, he calls me a fucking idiot because it means it has to look like a Pokemon. No, it fucking doesn't! Let's look at an actual Pokemon knockoff being Robopon. Even though this game rips off Pokemon, the robots that you fight don't look anything like a Pokemon. Even Digimon, depending on your view of if it's a rip-off of Pokemon or not, but it's at least very similar to Pokemon. They don't look like Pokemon either, so saying that I'm stupid because I said Beware looks like a knockoff, while also not looking like a Pokemon is freaking... You don't need to look like something to be a knockoff. Plus, Beware being a knockoff would mean that it wouldn't be part of the Pokemon universe, which is precisely my point of it not looking like a Pokemon. Next, he tells me to shut the fuck up, which is very mature. That really gives me a good impression of you. When I say that Teddiursa and Stuffle look more like Pokemon than Beware. It's my opinion, and I thought you fully knew that this was my opinion. Now you sound like a hypocrite. Teddiursa has more features since it has claws, the beady eyes, the circle around its mouth, the holes in its ears, and the crescent moon on its head. Meanwhile, Beware has the beady eyes as well, generic paw symbols, ears that look like a headband, and a tail. Not only is that less notable features than Teddiursa, but things like the paw symbols and the headband ears are less interesting as well, in my opinion. The color of its fur is not a noteworthy feature. Again, you're grasping for straws. As for Stuffle, it has the beady eyes, the ring around its face, a visible mouth, the tag sticking out of its ass, the tail, and the fact that the headband ears look more natural rather than tacked on. With Beware, its ears look more like it's just wearing a headband, but with Stuffle, the shift from the pink to white makes it clear that it's part of its anatomy. As for when I say that I personally don't understand why some people dislike Pokemon with complex designs, this is when he lectures me about character design. I skipped this rant just because my entire point was towards people that hated complex designs, not those who like basic designs. There are some people who don't like Pokemon with complex designs, which I never understood since I prefer Pokemon with complex designs as it makes them look more interesting. But when I skipped to the end, he said that I just disregarded the view of people liking basic designs. Bull fucking shit. I said I never understood why people dislike complex designs. Not that they were wrong. The reason why I never understood was because people never actually gave a reason themselves. And the fact that I even mentioned this viewpoint in the video shows that I didn't disregard it. I actually acknowledged it. Why are you gonna be so sensitive? Then we get to me talking about Bewear's blank expression where he says, maybe that's just a joke. Oh my god, have you not played the game? Spoiler alert here, but the part of the game that I was referring to was the second battle against Lucamine in Ultra Space, where all of our Pokemon are powered up like Totem Pokemon. All of them have very angry expressions, except for Bewear, and this is supposed to be an incredibly serious moment in the game. So I highly doubt that this will be a joke, especially when nobody even acknowledges it. Then I talk about not finding Bewear's type combination interesting, in which he takes this out of context and says, but think of the type coverage, even though my reasoning for why I didn't find the type interesting was because I'm not a fan of normal types, just because I don't find them very interesting. Then on Bewear's stats, he's like, no shit when I talk about Bewear's stats other than HP and attacks would be meh. I know it's for balancing, but I think that stats like speed and special defense could be a little bit higher while lowering special attacks since this thing learns no special attacks leveling up. Then when I mention Klutz being useless, he takes this out of context as well because he ignores saying that the strategy around Klutz is very situational until after this rant. He explains that the opponent could use Skill Swap to get Klutz or give Bewear a bad held item and have the opponent use an item switching move like Switcheroo. This just reinforces my point of the strategy being specific. You need the opponent to have those moves in the first place for this to work, since Bewear can't learn any of these moves from any means. As for Fluffy, when I say it's up to you on whether it's good or bad ability because of its weakness to fire being a drawback, he says, well, don't put it up against fire types. Well, what if you had no choice, such as Bewear being your last Pokemon? Also, you completely forget that non-fire types can still learn fire type moves. You want to know the main way that non-fire types can get fire type moves? Through TMs! You know, the thing you keep mentioning the whole time! Speaking of TMs, I mentioned how Bewear's level up moves meant that you had to rely on TMs to get good type coverage. I knew that he was going to kick off and be all like, oh, now you mention TMs, since he's so predictable. But then he kicks off at me for not showing the TM movelet. I mentioned TMs for a split second before immediately going back to its level up moves. So there will be no point in displaying the TM moves for such a short amount of time, since nobody will be able to really look at them. And then when I say that the dark type moves that Bewear gets leveling up are its only way of hitting ghost types when learning moves naturally, he mentions Shadow Claw as a TM. You're like Anita Sarkeesian. Nothing pleases you. I was going back to the level up moves. Finally, Incineroar. First off, he calls me cliched and accuses me of disliking Bewear because it's too close to home when I say, oh god, not this Pokemon. I only said that to emphasize how much I dislike the upcoming Pokemon. I didn't even know that was something that tons of people have done. So, just stop spreading these stupid accusations! When I say that I think Incineroar's design is awkward and doesn't work, he says that doesn't explain why it doesn't work. I literally just said I thought it looked awkward, and once more, you take this out of context, since I cover this throughout the whole section of talking about Incineroar's design. Then, when I talk about Incineroar's legs, he's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Since they get thicker as it gets closer to the upper body. I know this, but they still look too skinny for me, so it's just weird how these thin legs are supposed to hold up such a massive torso. Then when I say it would be better if the designers did something different with Incineroar rather than having yet another fire starter on 2 legs, he says, how would that change the design? It'll be on 4 legs. Was that not obvious enough? Also, because it would look more tiger-like to me rather than human. Then he calls me a hypocrite again by bringing up how I mentioned that psychic types mainly specialize in special attack with Hypno, but that would be better for something different with the fire starters. Basically, he's just saying that maybe Hypno was just something different. With psychic types, I was referring to already existing psychic types and what is already being established. But with Incineroar, I was thinking from the perspective of before it was created, in which they had the option of making it bipedal or quadrupedal. Did that not cross your mind? Next, it goes over me saying that my point on Incineroar looking more human than Tiger by saying it's anthropomorphic like Tony the Tiger. Pokemon is a different style to Frosted Flakes, and Tony the Tiger is basically just a tiger on 2 legs. Meanwhile, as I said in the video, Incineroar is primarily a human muscular body with a few cat features added on. It's the opposite. Instead of making an animal more human, they make a human more animal. Next, when I say Incineroar's design looks basic to the other Alolan starters, in which I mentioned that the wrestling belt is the only wrestling-related feature, he goes off on a tangent about things like Darkest Lariat and Malicious Moonsault. When I said that the wrestling belt was the only wrestling-related feature, I meant in terms of design! You can't even argue that I didn't explain this clear enough, because I clearly said this when talking about the Alolan starter designs! All you're doing is making me look stupid because, once again, you couldn't pay attention! As for the leotard and tiger mask, which is the only design-related things you mentioned at this part, the leotard doesn't look like a leotard at all. It looks more like a ripped t-shirt, and for the tiger mask, the tiger head is Incineroar's actual head. It's not wearing a mask, so it's not exactly the case. Also, later on he complains about me saying that Incineroar's deformed, in which he doesn't understand, even though I clearly went over its skinny legs and giant hands. That's what I meant, but of course you don't listen. Then we get to Incineroar's stats and moves, in which he now thinks that Incineroar is supposed to be a glass cannon. I never said that. I said that Incineroar is kind of the more balanced option because its defenses are decent. I personally think that Incineroar should just have more physical defense than what it actually does, because I can imagine the wrestler taking physical hits well, but something like an energy blast, not so well. And when I complain about it being slower than Emboar, he just says that I'm fat-shaming again. No, I think Incineroar being slower than Emboar makes no sense, because Incineroar is based on a heel, which is just a regular wrestler, while Emboar is based on a sumo wrestler, and regular wrestlers are shown to be faster than sumo wrestlers. Also, the Aura Guardian complained about Incineroar being slower than Emboar, but of course, he gets a pass, and not me. As for abilities, he criticizes me because Incineroar's Intimidate is better than Primarina's Liquid Voice. I know Intimidate is better, but my point was that it isn't a unique ability like what Decidueye Primarina got, which felt a bit underwhelming for me. Again, you don't listen! Then for moves, he says I'm wrong about Incineroar not receiving consistent moves that support its stats by saying that it learns Flamethrower. Flamethrower is a special move, and Incineroar's special attack is much lower than its physical attack. Therefore, Flamethrower does not support its stats! Do you even know how Pokemon works? And finally, when I talk about how disappointing Incineroar was for me, he mentions the fact that the Synchro of Rockruff and the starters was a mistranslation. Okay, I won't fault you too much on this, because you didn't know about this quote until making this video, but when Rockruff was first revealed in Korokoro, it said that it shared a secret with the starters, but later on that turned out to be a mistranslation, which, as you said, is that it and the starters both have their own secrets. However, at the time of Lycanroc's reveal, that wasn't known, or at least wasn't known by everybody, which led to the speculation of the starters having different forms as well. Plus, I had heard that it was a mistranslation, but I never saw anybody actually say what the correct translation was, which is why I never mentioned this in the video. Again, this was my anecdote of the lead up to Sun and Moon, so this part was told from the perspective of me when Lycanroc was revealed and when I thought that they actually did have a shared secret. And that's it for this video. He does have some final thoughts at the end, but I'm not even going to bother watching that since it would just be filled with him saying things like, this video's awful because of the stupid stuff I thought, because I wasn't listening, and twisting your words, taking them out of context and making my own assumptions. When you sent this link to me, I was hoping for some constructive criticism on how to improve. But instead, I honestly found one of the most immature people I have ever seen on the internet, who decides to make an hour-long response video on something he clearly didn't pay any attention to, as well as manipulating what I say to make him sound right when that clearly wasn't the case if you actually watched the video. Plus, instead of being respectful to me, you used this video to blatantly attack me personally by calling me things like a fucking idiot and attacking me over just trying to be respectful towards other people's opinions. When I make a response video, I'm respectful towards the person I'm responding to. So, since you have nothing better to do with your time, but to make hour-long videos attacking people for doing nothing wrong, but just having an opinion and making maybe one or two legitimate mistakes, I think you need to do something better with your time. But with that, I will see you guys for my next response video, which will be the actual video that I hinted at the end of the last one. Hey guys, it's TheMetalBlade5, and welcome to my response to Realmwarsii. I'm not sure how to pronounce the second half of his name. Metal Blade doesn't look like a Pokemon commentary, which doesn't make any sense since I'm not a Pokemon. Anyway, this video is a commentary on my top 10 most hated Pokemon list. Now, to clarify one thing, The reason why I'm making this video isn't because he's criticizing me, but rather because I found fault in his criticism. The main fault I found was that throughout this video, he doesn't really listen to what I say in the video and criticizes me for what he thinks I said, effectively meaning that he's criticizing me for something that I didn't actually do. Furthermore, throughout this video, he comes across as very condescending, if I'm being honest, since there are a few points in which he kind of treats me like an idiot by teaching me basic shit that I already know, like some kind of nursery teacher, and taking this snarky attitude, which makes him come across as immature from my perspective. And I personally think that that kind of attitude shouldn't be used in a commentary/response, since it should be more about presenting faults in the video itself, rather than making jab at the video's creator, which, at least to me, came off as insulting. So of course, since he goes through each of my entries, we start off with Delphox. First up, when I say that I think Delphox's design doesn't convey the fact that it's a fox, he stops the video there and asks me why I think that. This is a case in which he takes parts of my video out of context to use as a basis for counter-arguments. In a lot of reviews for video games and movies, the reviewer typically starts off with a short sentence explaining their thoughts, e.g., this game is good/bad, and then uses the rest of the review to explain why they think that. This is the same case here. Immediately after I say this, I mention how I think the other fire starters convey their animals much better. These two bits are supposed to go hand in hand, but Realm separates them. Speaking of the other fire starters, he says that Blaziken's long legs don't match with it being a chicken. Well, chickens and roosters, which is what Blaziken is more specifically based off of, actually do have long legs when compared to the rest of their body. But for the main event of the century, when I mentioned how I felt that Delphox's stick is the only thing related to witches in the design, Realm counters that by saying that the fur on Delphox's arm is supposed to look like wizard robes. Well, for one, this actually hasn't been confirmed, and I personally say the fur on its arms is more of a stylistic choice, but Delphox is specifically based on a witch, and wizards and witches are treated as two separate things. So I feel that my point still applies. As for how I felt that Delphox could have looked more like a witch, when talking about how the fur on its head could have been shaped into a witch's hat, Realm says its fur is already shaped after a witch, but a witch's hat is the most iconic feature of a witch. Therefore, even if the arms were designed on wizard robes, having a witch hat would still be more witch-related. Then for saying how the stick could have been a broomstick, Realm says it wouldn't change anything since it's replacing one thing with another. But again, a broomstick is more specifically witch-related, since the stick acts as a wand, and wizards and magicians have also used wands, so it still isn't specific to witches. Then when I mentioned how I thought fan art of Fennekin's Final Evolution looked better than Delphox, Realm claims that I'm discrediting Delphox's design. I never said that. I just thought the fan art looked better. There's a difference. Plus, Realm just skips over me saying that Delphox's design grew on me with this really annoying skipping animation. I know that he skipped it because he didn't find fault in it, but I think that he could have at least acknowledged it, because it makes people watching this video who haven't seen mine think I still hate it for the reason I mention. Next is Unknown. First, when I briefly mentioned that I don't find Unknown's design interesting, despite it not being why I dislike it, Realm criticized me for saying it anyway. All it was intended for was to just mention what I thought of Unknown's design for those who may have been curious. But when I go over how weak Unknown is, Realm believes that Unknown being useless is justified since it was created for world building and to introduce hidden power. That's honestly a flimsy excuse. Hidden power can be learned by almost any Pokemon, so needing to create one to introduce the move is just redundant. We didn't need a Pokemon to introduce Flamethrower or Thunderbolt. And as for world building, there have been other Pokemon that exist for world building, such as fossil Pokemon, since they act as the Pokemon universe's dinosaurs, but most fossil Pokemon are pretty good, so why should Unknown be allowed to suck because it exists for world building? Then we get to an instance in which Realm doesn't listen to the video when I say that Hidden Power won't do much damage due to Unknown's shit stats. Unknown can only learn one move throughout the entire series, being Hidden Power, which is barely going to do any damage due to its shit stats. Because Realm counters this point by showing that Hidden Power has decent power, even though I said Unknown's bad stats were the reason why Hidden Power won't do much damage, not because of the move itself. Then when I talk about how Unknown is shown to be powerful when together, he points out how the Pokédex entries don't mention bending reality. The anime was the basis for me mentioning that power, and the Pokédex just reinforces that they're strong when together, which you don't see in the games. As for Realm saying that anime does a lot of bullshit, like ground types getting hit by electric type moves, these are typically one-off instances, while Unknown has always been shown with reality-bending powers when together. And then when he criticizes me for not mentioning people who thought Unknown would be powerful based on the third movie, since I wasn't aware that it would be such a massive problem, Tricky Wii and Tamashi Hiroka made a top 10 disappointing Pokemon list, and Unknown was on there for that specific reason, which people in the comments also agreed with. Lastly for this part, when I briefly mentioned the side quest in Gen 4 involving Unknown that I thought was unrewarding, he criticized me for not saying why. The reason why I didn't say it was because it would be going off topic, since I would then just be talking exclusively about the side quest rather than Unknown. But since you want to know so badly, all you get is a rare candy, which isn't worth it after catching every Unknown, since you could just grind, which will take less time. Now for Alomomola. When I talk about how similar Alomomola and Luvdisc look, Realm dismisses it by pointing out other Pokemon that look similar, like Caterpie and Wurmple. I don't get where you're coming from with this, since Caterpie and Wurmple look nothing alike. They're both based on caterpillars, but are designed so differently. Alomomola and Luvdisc are the only case of Pokemon that look so similar but have absolutely no connection. Not even something like Mimikyu with Pikachu. And then when I talk about how I felt that Alamomola's HP stat was unnoticeable due to taking it out in 1 or 2 hits, Realm says my point is invalid, since the reason was because of Alamomola's low defense and special defense. I always saw HP like a defense stat, since it shows how much damage you need to do in order to knock it out. So I still think that my point stands, because if it's still easy to take out, then the HP stat isn't performing its function very well. Realm does mention Pokemon like Snorlax and Blissey, but even when using physical moves against them, I have had a bit of trouble taking them out. Next is Alamomola's move pool, in which Realm tells me to just use it for double battles, since a lot of its moves only work in double battles. Except that the vast majority of battles in Pokemon games are single battles, where these moves are useless. There is VGC, but I'm not a competitive Pokemon player, and I never looked at these Pokemon competitively to begin with. Finally, a recurring trend in this video from this point up until Incineroar is that Realm slams me for not mentioning moves that these Pokemon learn through TMs, breeding, and tutoring. The reason why I didn't mention them was because you have to go out of your way to teach them those moves, since you either need the specific TM, the right parent Pokemon, or a specific item for tutoring. Plus, if a Pokemon has to rely on outside methods to get good moves, I still think that it should be criticized for that, since it doesn't learn good moves naturally. So just because it can learn good moves through TM, for example, doesn't excuse it for having a bad level up moveset. Also, if I mentioned every single learning technique, the video would just drag on longer than it did. Although, you made an hour-long commentary, so maybe you're a little less concerned on time than me. And other people have also criticized Pokemon for only learning good moves through TM, e.g. Sugar Conroy in his Pokemon Platinum LP. And they don't get criticized for that, so I'm a bit confused as to why it's such an issue when I do it. I personally felt that the way I worded the move pool section, such as saying the moves it naturally learns, and when saying that Beware has to rely on TMs to get good type coverage, would mean that people would understand where I'm coming from. Now, you could argue that I wasn't clear enough, but what more so bothers me at these parts is that you kind of just assume that I'm not including the other moves to make them look bad, rather than potentially looking at multiple explanations for why I didn't mention them. Getting to Alolan Persian, Realm says that Alolan Persian isn't even fat, but when you compare the models of regular Persian and Alolan Persian is chubbier, and everybody was already calling Alolan Persian fat beforehand, so I was just following what everyone else was doing at the time. So why is it such a massive issue when I say it? You could have at least acknowledged the other people saying this as well, because it makes it seem like you're just exclusively referring to me when I say it. But when I say it's never stated why Alolan Persian is fat, Realm just uses Alolan Meowth's pampering as an excuse. When I was making the video, I did consider the possibility that Alolan Meowth might have been fed a lot as part of its pampering, but for one, that hasn't been stated, and Alolan Meowth is skinny, so why would it only be fat when it evolves? Then when I mentioned that I feel like Alolan Persian's head looks too big, he compares it to a caricature. Again, it hasn't been stated if Alolan Persian took inspiration from caricatures, but even if it did, that doesn't automatically excuse it for looking bad in my opinion, which I'll get to later. Plus, When I say a lone person's head should be weighing it down, Realm condescendingly says, and Embor shouldn't be able to stand up with its stubby legs. Even though Embor's legs aren't that short and they're definitely thick enough to hold its upper body weight. Then when I talk about what I think they could have done with a lone person's design, in which I mentioned that they could give it a personality similar to Giovanni's Persian, Realm says it has nothing to do with design. Even though I was specifically referring to personality during that part. A character's personality can actually be reflected in their design. Anime actually does this a lot with hair color, and even Alolan Meowth's design shows its sassy nature. This comes off as a bit hypocritical to me, when later on in the video Realm gives me a lecture on character design, but he doesn't appear to know this. Also, when I question why Alolan Persian is considered beautiful, he just mentions that in its Pokedex entries, its coat is more shinier than high-class velvet, which... that's more just kind of a theory you made rather than an actual explanation for why it's considered beautiful. So I don't really see it as a good counter-argument. But getting back to the it's my opinion thing, Realm takes such offense to me saying in my opinion throughout the video. This part of the video really pissed me off, because Realm assumes that the only reason I do this is to avoid criticism, and treats me like an idiot by saying that I'm wrong if saying it's my opinion will prevent me from facing criticism, and that the reasons behind an opinion can be criticized. Even though I do this all the time in my other response videos. The reason why I consistently say, in my opinion, is because I don't want to piss off people who disagree with me by making it sound like I'm saying these negative things as fact. In this instance, I said I thought Alolan Person's design looked bad, but if I just said it looks bad, it makes it sound like fact, when it's all subjective, so that's why I add, in my opinion. It's just the kind of person I am, so, in future... don't just assume someone does something for a specific reason, and instead look at different possibilities, because the fact that you're spreading false accusations about me, whether intentional or unintentional, is a really dumb way to behave in a response. Now for Bruxish. When I make a joke on how Bruxish's shiny looks like an Italian restaurant, Realm goes nuts over it because he doesn't understand it. Shiny Bruxish's color scheme consists of red, green, and white, which are the same colors as the Italian flag, which made me think of Italy. Then its other color is yellow, which when combined with the red and green made me think of a pizza. Yellow is the cheese, red is the tomato sauce, and green is lettuce or green peppers. And since pizza is Italian food, I just decided to put restaurant in there. I thought that either people would get the Italian bit, or find it so ridiculous that they'd laugh. I'm not faulting you for not finding the joke funny, but all it is just a stupid joke, so I don't know why the hell you're taking it so seriously and calling me an idiot over it. When I talk about how I think Bruxish's stats are lackluster, Ron condescendingly says, well gee, it's as if Bruxish wasn't designed to be good in battle, but rather to fill the world with another kind of Pokemon. You know, world building! Honestly, using the world building excuse here is really dumb. Nothing about Bruxish expands the lore of the Pokemon universe aside from adding another kind of Pokemon. But you could just use that explanation for every single Pokemon ever, even the most forgettable ones. And if Game Freak just wanted to throw in new Pokemon just to fill the world, then Gen 7 would have way more Pokemon than it does. Plus, like I said with Unknown, even if Bruxish did exist for world building, that doesn't excuse its shortcomings. Speaking of which, when I talk about Bruxish not being as good as other Gen 7 water types like Golisopod, Well mentions Pokemon like Typhlosion, who aren't as good as others, but still good. Except that what I was getting at was that since Bruxish's stats are lackluster, these other Pokemon do their jobs better, and are way more worth your time. Even while not being as good as others, Typhlosion is still a good Pokemon, while I think that Bruxish is pretty mediocre. Now, Hypno. When I talk about Hypno's stats, with its special attack being low, Realm just says that Hypno is supposed to be a special tank. I was aware of that, but my point was that compared to a lot of other Psychic types, who typically specialize in special attack, Hypno gets left behind even with its different playstyle due to its low attacking stats, making it much slower for it to win battles. And when I talk about how I feel that other Pokemon like Snorlax do the job of putting the opponent to sleep and dealing damage afterwards, Realm says, but can Snorlax learn Dream Eater? Even though Hypno can only learn Dream Eater through TM. When I said that, I was just referring to Snorlax using regular attacking moves like Body Slam, in which it could deal a lot of damage while also possessing a lot of bulk to take hits after the opponent wakes up. Meanwhile, even with Dream Eater, Hypno's low special attack kind of limits the effectiveness of the move, even with it being a good move for Hypno to have.
Then, when I briefly mention how a lot of Gen 1 designs look basic when compared to later Gen Pokemon, Realm brings up the obvious reason that I'm pretty sure everybody already knew, being it was the first generation, and treats me like an idiot again. I thought that would be a no shit thing, which is why I didn't mention it. But I know the reason why Gen 1 Pokemon have basic designs, but it doesn't mean I can't compare them to later Gen Pokemon. Then, to finish off this entry, when I jokingly say that Hypno is a pedophile, Realm takes it seriously and goes on a tangent about how Hypno isn't a pedophile because it's not human. Despite me obviously saying it in a jokey manner, that Hypno is a pedophile to reference the fact that it kidnaps children and looks like an old man, pretty much every Pokemon fan has made that comparison. It is the easiest and most predictable joke you could make about Hypno. So I'm confused as to why you think that I meant it seriously. I mean, Pokemon is a kid's game, so of course they're not going to put a pedophile in it. Also, when I briefly bring up the creepypastas, or just one, even though I thought that there were at least 2 Hypno creepypastas, Realm think I'm using it as an argument against Hypno even though they're fan-made, in which he didn't catch what I actually said. I said that Hypno spawned creepypastas, meaning that it caused them, due to how creepy it is. I never used them as a point against it. Then we get to Aromatisse, in which Realm uses the fact that Aromatisse's name and lore is supposed to be its reference to perfume balls and flamenco dancers. Even though I said that I couldn't tell that Aromatisse was based on those things from looking at it, which was purely focusing on design. Speaking of which, when I mentioned how I think that Aromatisse did little with the Plague Doctor concept, I was also referring to design, but once again, Realm doesn't catch that, and uses the fact that Plague Doctors use perfume to call me stupid and lazy. Similarly, when I said that I was disappointed in how Spritzy's evolution ended up looking, Realm compares me to a whiny baby, which is very mature, isn't it? And says that I'm biased. When I mention things like finding the design disappointing, all I'm saying is how I personally thought the design could have been better. I'm still primarily looking at the Pokemon as it is. And what kind of logic is it to think that just because you find something disappointing means that you're whining? Oh look, Mass Effect 3! We know that everybody found this game disappointing because of the ending, but in reality, you're just wrong and are whiny children. It's a really stupid thing to do if I'm being honest. As for calling me biased, admittedly I am biased, but this list is my opinion. I'm not saying that to avoid criticism like you think, but rather I think that opinion and bias go hand in hand. Since this list is primarily my opinion on these Pokemon, I'm of course going to find fault in them for reasons that might not bother others. If I was saying these Pokemon were factually bad, which I actively avoided trying to come off as, then saying I'm biased would be a legitimate counter-argument. But this is my opinion, so I think it's kind of null and void. Then aside from complaining about me not showing TMs, Realm argues against me when I said that I think Aromatisse's stats should have been more like Slurpuff's by saying it would be redundant, even though I said it should have been more like Slurpuff rather than exactly like. And this was under the context of me thinking that Aromatisse's stats were so randomly distributed, while Slurpuff's were more consistent. Plus, I gave an alternate option of making it a special attacker or special tank by removing some of its physical attack, since it only learns one physical move leveling up, but that never gets acknowledged. Next is the elemental monkeys. Once again, Realm calls me biased in this list at 2 moments. The first being when I talk about my personal grudge with Simipour. Even though with this list being my opinion, I thought that I could have any reason to dislike a Pokemon, but I guess that doesn't matter anymore, Realm makes it out as if my grudge against Simipour is because I was stuck with it, which I never said. My grudge came from the fact that I didn't like the design when I saw it, and that I felt stuck with a Pokemon I didn't like due to being in the after game when I evolved Panpour, in which if I caught a different water type, I would have to grind it to reach the rest of my team, and it would lack all the EVs I got with Panpour/Simipour to begin with. The other time he calls me biased is at the end of the entry, when I talk about how Simisear got dead last in the poll for what Pokemon should be distributed with the 19th movie, because Realm just assumes that the text I added in of questioning why Pawniard got second to last only exists because I like Pawniard, which he once again says in a very snarky manner. Once again, you just assume I do something for a specific reason without looking at multiple possibilities. I do like Pawniard, but that's not the reason why I said that. I've never seen anybody that dislikes Pawniard, while I've seen a lot of other people, e.g. Birdkeeper Toby, who dislike the elemental monkeys. So I found it weird why Pawniard, a Pokemon that most people appear to like, ranked so low. As for when Realm questions where the other monkeys are, Admittedly, I couldn't find it because this image is taken from Rabbid Luigi and Hoodlum Scrafty's top 10 worst Pokemon designs list, in which they never mentioned where the other two were, but I was approaching this from the idea that since the monkeys are so similar, if one scored so low, what does that say about the other two? Also, in regards to designs, Rabbid Luigi and Hoodlum Scrafty brought up the same points I did when talking about the elemental monkeys in Alomomola, but I don't see them getting any hate for it, so again, why does it appear like it's only an issue when I do it? And speaking of the monkeys being similar to each other, it takes me over to what pissed me off the most about this part of the video. Realm calls me a hypocrite, because apparently I said Brux's stats were decent while the elemental monkeys were mediocre despite them having a higher stat total. Except that I said Brux's speed was decent, not its stats overall. As for Brux's stats, it has good physical attack and decent speed, decent speed, decent speed, decent speed. Meanwhile, with the elemental monkeys, I was referring to their stats overall. All the elemental monkey stats are mediocre. Again, you just assume that when I said all, I was referring to each of their stats, when in reality I meant all, as in all of the elemental monkeys, since they have the exact same stat distribution. I even said that their speed stat was good, just that it was only 101, unlike other speedy Pokemon, who typically have their speed stat in the 110s or 120s. Getting closer to the end, it's Beware. First up, Realm calls me a fucking idiot for saying that Beware looks like a Pokemon knockoff after saying it doesn't look like a Pokemon, because apparently, being a knockoff means you have to look like what you're ripping off. No, you don't. An actual Pokemon knockoff is Robopon, and none of the robots in that game look like Pokemon. And even something like Digimon, which could arguably be a Pokemon knockoff depending on your views, but everybody at least agrees that they're similar. Digimon don't look like Pokemon either. Then continuing on with me talking about how Beware doesn't look much like a Pokemon, where I say that I personally think Teddiursa and stuff will look more like Pokemon, Realm tells me to shut the fuck up, which again is very mature. I thought you knew this was my opinion, but when I add, in my opinion at the end of this bit, but we also had Teddiursa, who definitely fitted more in the Pokemon universe than Beware does in my opinion. But you treat it as if I'm saying it as fact. This just reinforces why I constantly say, in my opinion. Anyway, Realm tries to prove me wrong by saying that Beware and Teddiursa have the exact same features. Except that he uses things like the color of Beware's fur as a feature, even though that's like an obvious thing that doesn't need to be mentioned, which came across like grasping at straws to me. My stance for thinking that Teddiursa and Stuffle look more like Pokemon than Beware comes from the fact that not only both of them have more interesting features in my opinion, but they also look more detailed to me. For example, Teddiursa's ears have holes in them, to further show that they're ears, and Stuffle's ears have this transitional fade effect from pink to white to show that it's part of its body. Meanwhile, Beware's ears look more like it's wearing a headband to me. Lastly, on the subject of Beware's design, Realm gives me a lecture on character design, because apparently I said I didn't understand why people like basic designs. Which is bullshit. There are some people who don't like Pokemon with complex designs, which I never understood since I prefer Pokemon with complex designs as it makes them look more interesting. I said that I didn't understand why people dislike complex designs. I can actually understand why people like basic designs, but I never understood why people hated complex ones, because the people who I see saying this, such as Candy, Eevee, and PD Winnel, just say, no complex designs, but don't explain why they don't like them, which is where I got confused. Honestly, I skipped the rant, just because Realm was literally arguing over nothing, but at the end, he said that I disregard the view of people liking basic designs. The fact that I acknowledge this view shows that I didn't disregard it. I mentioned that some people share that view. This part just made you look a bit too sensitive, if I'm being honest. Also, when I said that I personally thought Beware's type combination wasn't very interesting, Realm just ignores the part where I say that I'm not a fan of normal types, which was my explanation as to why I didn't like the type. But getting to Beware's use in battle, when I mentioned how Fluffy could be good or bad depending on your view, due to its weakness to fire, Realm just says, well, don't use it against fire types. Except that non-fire types can still learn fire type moves, which could throw you off guard. In fact, the main method of teaching non-fire types fire type moves is through TMs, which seemed a bit hypocritical to me that Realm keeps criticizing me for not showing TMs, but doesn't acknowledge TMs here. Speaking of TMs, when I watched the video, I knew that Realm was going to say, oh, now you mention TMs, when I say that Beware has to rely on TMs to get good type coverage, but then goes nuts when I don't show the TM move list. The reason why I didn't show the list was because the mentioning of TMs was so brief, and I immediately went back to talking about the level up moves when I talk about how the 2 dark type moves Beware learns leveling up are its only method of hitting ghost types when not using TMs. But even when I say this, Realm just brings up how Beware can learn Shadow Claw through TM. This just shows why I kept the level up moves list on screen. Not to be lazy like you claim, but rather so that people still knew I was talking about the level up moves, even though you didn't catch that. And now finally for Incineroar, after he makes another snarky remark by saying that I only dislike Beware because it's too close to home. Which again, it's very mature to insult the person you're responding to, isn't it? When I say that I think Incineroar's design looks awkward and doesn't work, Realm once again questions why. But like he did with Delphox, he takes this out of context. Me saying the design looks awkward was the opening statement in which the rest of the entry talking about the design was supposed to be the explanation. Then when I mention the weird body proportions, Realm calls me stupid again, because Incineroar's legs get thicker as they get close to the torso. I was only referring to the legs below the pelvis level, in which they do look too thin to hold up a muscular cat. Wrestlers' legs are much thicker than that. Then when I say that it could have been better if Game Freak did something different by not having another bipedal fire starter, Realm calls me a hypocrite again by saying that Hypno was supposed to be different from other psychic types, but I criticize it for that. With Hypno, I was going off of what has already been established. Most psychic types specialize in special attack, like how most water types specialize in bulk, and most electric types specialize in speed. While with Incineroar, I was referring to before it was designed, in which they had the choice of making it bipedal or quadrupedal. Also, with Hypno, I didn't fault it for being a special tank, but rather for having low special attack, and I was only referring to its stats. While with Incineroar, I was talking about design, so comparing these two parts doesn't exactly work. Then Realm goes off on about how would Incineroar being on 4 legs change the design. It would be on 4 legs. I wasn't sure exactly where you were coming from with this, but I mentioned how I would have preferred it if Incineroar was more tiger-like than human, and making it quadrupedal would have helped that for me. Also, even coming from someone who hates Incineroar's design, I will admit that it would look even more awkward if it was on 4 legs, just because the design is so centered on it being bipedal. Also, when I get to the part of thinking that Incineroar looks more human than cat, Realm just brings up Tony the Tiger as a way of proving me wrong. Tony the Tiger is designed in a more cartoony manner compared to Incineroar, who's supposed to look more serious, so I think comparing the two doesn't exactly work for that reason. Also, my point about Incineroar was more that it felt more like they designed a human and added cat features on top of that, rather than doing what Frosted Flakes did with Tony the Tiger and just make a tiger bipedal. Lastly, on Incineroar's design, Realm doesn't listen to me when I talk about how I feel that Incineroar's design is a bit basic compared to the other Alolan starters, since the wrestling belt is the only part of its design that's specifically related to wrestling. Now, despite this clearly being under the context of design, furthermore, I feel it's designed to be very basic when compared to the other Alolan starters, because Decidueye and Primarina have various features that relate to what they're based on, incorporated into the designs, while Incineroar only has the wrestling belt as its wrestling-related feature. Realm brings up Darkest Lariat and Malicious Moonsault, even though those are moves and have nothing to do with Incineroar's appearance. Plus, he treats me like an idiot again by adding on that the Lariat / Moonsault is a wrestling move, which I already knew. Granted, Realm does bring up a few design elements, such as Incineroar's torso being designed after a wrestling leotard. Even though it looks nothing like that to me, Pignite wears a leotard, while Incineroar looks more like it's wearing a ripped t-shirt, which is something that I don't see wrestlers wear, at least not commonly. And as for the tiger mask, Incineroar's head doesn't really look like it's designed on a mask, but rather just a tiger head, so I don't think that completely applies. Now lastly, with Incineroar's use in battle and name. For some reason, Realm thinks that Incineroar is a glass cannon, even though I never said that. I said it's more of the balanced option, and honestly, Incineroar's stats aren't bad. They just felt a bit underwhelming to me compared to the other starters, since it only has one stat that is at least or over 100. I personally think that it should have higher defense than it actually does with lower special defense. The same thing goes for Incineroar having Intimidate for its hidden ability. Realm points out how Primarina's Liquid Voice is worse, which I already knew, but my entire point, which he didn't catch, was that while Intimidate is a great ability, I felt a little bummed out that Incineroar didn't get its own signature ability like Decidueye and Primarina. Then for Incineroar's move pool, Realm says I'm wrong about Incineroar not getting good moves because it learns Flamethrower, despite the fact that Flamethrower is not a good move for Incineroar to have due to its low special attack. And then Realm once again just assumes that I'm trying to make it out as if Incineroar has no redeeming qualities. Not to sound like a smartass, but did you not catch that I said Incineroar is the more balanced option out of the starters, and that Intimidate is a great ability? I clearly mentioned positives about Incineroar. Plus, Incineroar has awesome type coverage. My only issue with the level up moves was that it doesn't consistently get good moves, both in terms of power and supporting its stats, until level 55. Lastly, when I say that I think Incineroar's name sounds dumb, in which it was 100% opinion and not based on any facts, there are some people who think the name sounds cool, and that's fine by me. But Realm calls me stupid because it's apparently wordplay. I don't see how combining the words incinerate and roar is wordplay, unlike the example you use of Beautifly, which is a pun. Besides, even if it was wordplay, that wouldn't change the fact that I personally think it sounds dumb. And that's it for the video. Realm does have some final thoughts, but honestly I didn't bother listening to them just because of how much it's based on what he thinks I said, rather than what I actually said. If I'm being brutally honest here, Realm, I think that this video is half-assed, just because of how the majority of your counter-arguments were based on you not paying attention to the video, in which they can simply be countered by just watching the video you're responding to. It just makes me feel like I'm getting hated on and harassed by your fans over nothing. Furthermore, when making a commentary, don't just assume the video creator does something for one specific reason, because you don't know me, so you don't know what goes on in my head. Instead, you should just say, this comes across as if, or at least look at different reasons why someone may have said something, rather than just deciding, right, this is definitely what they meant, and it goes in line with my counter-arguments. Lastly, just don't treat the people you're responding to like idiots, and don't resort to using insults or acting in a condescending / snarky manner when making your points, because it makes it come across as more personal. This is the reason why I got so pissed in the original response video, and my dumbass reply to your comment with the link to your video, because I felt that I was getting attacked over just expressing my dislikes on something. Not that I'm trying to use the opinion card throughout this video, but there were a few occasions in which you called me stupid over something that was entirely an opinion with no facts to back it up. But anyway, as long as I can finally put this shit behind me and get on with my life, I'll see you guys for my next response video.